won it once before in the past, a few years ago. I'm not exactly sure which year. Andre, if you know, you're welcome to say it. Or Arlene, I know Arlene's on the meeting with us. So these are only handed out to one chapter in a year. And we're actually quite honored to have received this. Thanks to the 2018, 2020, and our current board. The guys have done a stellar job, the directors, the volunteers, members, and staff for renewing your memberships as well. And all of those things get taken into account. Membership renewals, we get into that a bit later. So membership renewals, it's due, guys. I'm sure lots of you will receive your notifications. You would have received notification also of prizes and incentives to get those membership renewals referred. So there are prizes. They have different tiers for different levels of prizes awarded to the number of memberships that you allow in. So some of you would have seen the notifications for our designations. We offer 2. If you wish to inquire about them, please email, follow the link above. We are SACWA accredited now for those two designations. If you do meet the criteria, that would be great, growing our brand here in South Africa and our presence, especially with companies that follow the SACWA certifications. These are some of the goodies that we offer now in South Africa for ISACA. I've got the mug, and some of our team, we have some of the other kit as well. We've got to say, guys, it's really good. Eh? Arlene, well done there. The quality of these products are really nice. And I'm sure we've got a few others on the way as well. So upcoming events. This is our next online webinar on the 10th of February. Starts at 4:30 and ends at 6. Please make sure you join this. You can see there's 2 CPEs. Those of you who are chasing CPEs, it's not necessarily a bad thing. We need our CPEs to maintain our certifications and our memberships. So please attend this. We're going to try and make each of these quite eventful as possible. We've got some really good speakers lined up for the rest of the year, and today's speakers are really good. Junaid, you're first up. Junaid?
Nolan, can you hear me now?
Yeah, sure. Can hear you.
Great. Okay. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. And thanks to ISACA for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. I think just in terms of the topic for today, as I said, we'll be discussing the evolution of cybercrime, and maybe just from an introductory perspective for myself, I'm with PwC and effectively looking after our digital forensics and incident response teams for the firm. So what we do is we assist clients with digital forensic investigations, or in instances where they've been hacked, we act as the first responders in order to assist with the response. I'm still getting used to this virtual way of presenting where I can't see everyone, so please feel free to ask questions during the course of the presentation. More than happy to take questions as we go through, if anybody has any burning questions, or I think there will be some time at the end as well. So maybe jumping straight into the topic, if we're looking at the current cyber landscape, there's some trends, definite trends that we're seeing that have been changing over the years, right? The one thing that's really key is that geolocation no longer makes a difference in terms of where you're sitting in the world. So the type of cybercrime you're experiencing, it doesn't make a difference if you're sitting in Africa, Asia, Middle East, wherever. We're seeing similar trends all across. What we did note, with a few of the attacks that we saw maturing is that sometimes Africa and Asia are used as almost sandboxes for testing attacks, refining them, and then launching them on European or US targets. The other trend that we're seeing is that attacks in the financial sector have really flattened over the last few years. So what that means is that attackers are starting to shift to other industries. And I'll show you some of the stats that we've pulled out based on what we see leaking onto the dark web from organizations to give you an idea of the sectors that that they're shifting to. So what this means in a nutshell is that no industry is immune from attacks. So the old sort of view that only financial sector or specific sectors are not going to face cybercrime, that's really falling away. And the last thing is really cyber or cybercrime is not really a technology issue or IT issue, but it's really an organizational issue. So the reliance on IT and technology has shifted from it being a support function to a business imperative. And then, just to recap, if we talk of how this landscape has matured over time, if we think back, going back probably 15, 20 years, organizations had closed networks, on-prem systems, and they were pretty much connected by their own dedicated lines. Then you reached a point where, things opened up to allow emails, internet.
Sorry, Junaid.
Yeah.
Sorry, Junaid, to interrupt you. I think there's a problem with your screen sharing.
Is it? No, I'm still on the first slide.
No, we can't actually see your slide.
You can't see the, okay, let me just try that again.
No problem, Junaid. These are the kind of issues we would have anyway in person.
Okay, tell me if that works now.
Oh, awesome. You can see that.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I was just describing that evolving landscape that we've seen from a cyber perspective. So we opened up networks to allow emails in and out, the internet. Organizations shifted, in the 90s to e-commerce. We had all these platforms, and then we started connecting our e-commerce platforms to back-end systems within the organization, which started, all of these things started contributing with expanding the attack surface for attackers. Now we've reached a point where your consumer devices that your actual customers are using are connecting back to your own networks in some cases. So think your digital fitness devices, your smartphones, etc. So what this starts doing is that the risk that sits on any of these devices, can become an entry point, or the vulnerabilities on these devices can become an entry point into your organization systems, just because of that interconnected landscape. This is pretty much on this next slide where we talk of the new business ecosystem. You've got this interconnected landscape with your, with various parties, and a risk at the vulnerability that any one of them has presents a risk to your organization. And in essence, what it means is that it's difficult to define what's the perimeter of your organization network, right? Moving on, if you look at the threat actors, where are these attacks coming from, who are launching these attacks, you have about 4 categories that we normally speak to. Your nation states, effectively state-sponsored hacking, and the one that's got a lot of coverage since December is the SolarWinds attack, where it's alleged that Russian state-sponsored hackers injected malicious code into an update on SolarWinds software. That software is used by a number of government organizations in the US, and that then affected a number of government organizations as well as private sector organizations, right? So that's where we see nation states playing. the other groups that we see out there, there's a group called the Lazarus Group. They were fairly active towards the end of last year. That's a North Korean group sponsored by the North Korean government. And they were launching attacks against cryptocurrency houses. Effectively through LinkedIn, they'd identify who your system administrators are, make them a job offer, but that job offer is sent to them in a Word document that has malware embedded in it. So once the person opens the Word document, they compromise the system administrator's computer, and from there get a lot of your admin level passwords to be able to allow them to attack the cryptocurrency houses. So they were effectively stealing wallets and cryptocurrency at that particular time. Russia, we've seen another group called APT 29. They were fairly active around August last year, and they were doing two things. So one was looking for vaccine information, anything related to COVID. The second was, a lot of attacks against Office 365 platforms and just harvesting credentials. Then throughout, 2019, 2020, beginning of 2020, we saw a lot of state-sponsored hackers between India and Pakistan launching attacks against each other. And like that, as much as every country denies it, I think everybody's involved in this. Almost every military now has a cyber warfare division, and in many cases, this is extending into state-sponsored hacking as well. The next category that we look at is organized crime, and effectively they just, for financial gain. In this space, you see a lot of these ransomware attacks and various other attacks where they're trying to monetize something, steal personal information, breach financial information, intellectual property, etc. So around 2016, we saw an uptick in their activity, as well as the quality of coding that was used in in some of the attacks. This seems to have been as a result of a breach of the National Security Agency in the US in 2016. They had a division that's called, or they have a division that's called Tactical Access Operations, and they effectively develop military-grade hacks that they can use against other countries. So that division was hacked, and a lot of the malware that they were writing leaked out. So organized crime picked this up, reworked it to do whatever they wanted to do, and you saw a higher quality of code coming out on the net. A new trend we saw during the COVID period was that the malware creators, working with these organized crime syndicates, have started offering affiliate programs. So if you offer to distribute their malware for them, they'll give you a percentage of the takings that they get from these successful attacks where people pay the ransom, right? So they're almost structuring themselves like we see within corporates, core competencies, etc. You're seeing that become very well defined in the organized crime space. Hacktivists have been, and that's the next category. Their motivation is effectively they're doing something for a cause. So it's activists using hacking as a means to express themselves. So we saw a decline in hacktivist activity over the last few years. Then we saw an uptick last year, June, with the Blue Leaks. That's where, with all the unrest in the US, the hacktivists started leaking information from law enforcement agencies in the US. So 251 law enforcement agencies were breached, and details of over 700,000 officers were released as part of that. Right? Parts of those data sets even included pictures of suspects, personal information, bank account details, etc. And in the last category that we speak about are insiders. Right? So that's any trusted individual or party who has access to your systems. And in many of the investigations we've done in South Africa, we found third parties were involved. So sometimes there's a disgruntled employee within the third party who has access to clients' systems, and they launch some sort of attack or shut down systems because they're upset with the company they're actually working for, right? So it's not that they have any grudge against that particular client themselves. So we had a few of those. Also, the other thing that you're seeing a lot of is what we're calling the accidental insider. That's people who don't have any malicious intent, but do something incorrectly or accidentally, and by doing that, they release information online, right? So knowing these 4 types of attackers that are out there, what's important for most organizations to do is to develop something like a graph that you see on the right-hand side to say, okay, knowing that we operate in X industry, we have certain information, etc. Which types of attackers would we be attracting? And knowing that, that should be one of the starting points in developing your security strategy, because without that knowledge, you effectively don't know who you're protecting against from an attack perspective. Okay, moving on to the next slide. These are just screenshots from from crypto wallets. So again, just out of interest, we tracked a piece of malware that or this organized crime syndicate that had launched malware last year called Netwalker, a ransomware. And what we're doing was looking at the crypto wallets just to look at how much of money is going through, right? So in the first 6 weeks of them operating their ransomware, we saw $4.5 million going through. And then probably about 9 weeks, I think it was probably about the 9 or 10 week mark, we saw that amount that had gone through the crypto wallet was about $25 million, right? So that just gives you an idea of the scale or how quickly they're able to monetize and make profits of these activities. They're also running an affiliate program, and they detail what levels of distribution you'll need to do in order to be able to get different levels of payment from them or sharing based on the distribution of their malware. During the same period, just from a South African perspective, we saw over 10,000 credit card details leaking onto the dark web, and the selling price, just to give you an idea, was between $25 to $75 US per card details. And then you also notice other details leaking from credit cards, which are typical of the details that you enter when you're using an e-commerce site. So that's typically your card details, CVV information, etc. We saw that being sold for between $9 to $16 US online. So if we analyze, the incidents that PwC incident response teams have been responding to, this is predominantly through 2020. Financial services was still pretty high up. We saw professional services coming in next, powers, utilities, etc. You can see the industries on the left-hand side. And if you look at the breakdown of the intent of what we could see behind it, 71% was largely crime. So that might speak to your organized crime type syndicates. 18% insider threat and 11% espionage, and that could be a mix of crime and nation state activity, especially in when we look at industries like oil and gas, power utilities, etc. The nation states do take an interest in those industries. Just a quote, I think this quote is quite apt for what we saw during the COVID period. We didn't see too many new attacks, but we saw attacks being modified due to remote working and the fact that people weren't able to see each other face to face as much. So, some of these attacks that you would have seen during, when we had the hard lockdowns, you saw the John Hopkins map that was being used to show the spread of COVID. They loaded a lot of malware into other sites, which was used to either phish or get malware onto people's computers. Then we started seeing on the app stores lots of mobile malware variants, appearing. Some of them purporting to be from the World Health Organization, and the rest of it, phishing scams were, on the increase. Smishing, which is, via SMS, You start seeing that towards tax filing seasons in almost every country that becomes seasonal, but that also accelerated during the COVID period. But I think the key thing that was driving it, if we looked at the chatter on the dark web, was that attackers were also battling financially, essentially, right? Due to the travel restrictions, credit card fraud was, the banks were able to close that out fairly quickly, and it was killing a lot of their revenue streams. So they were looking for other avenues, and that's where we started seeing, at a corporate level, that huge uptick in ransomware attacks as well. So, looking at this next slide, this is what we did is a trending of all the leaked data that we can see on the dark web, and we started splitting it by sector to say, from which sector did we see the most leaked data appearing on the dark web. And what's interesting when you look at that is manufacturing, which is an industry we wouldn't think would be top of the list. We saw 17% of the data coming out of the manufacturing sector, 16% from, so manufacturing followed by retail, then your tech, media, and telecommunications at about 10%. And then interestingly, you had construction at 9%, right? So this is that shift that we're talking of, where attackers are looking at other industries that have underinvested in security and moving away from the financial sector. What it also means for the financial sector is that what we're seeing are really serious attackers who are left behind. So when they're launching attacks, those are fairly devastating, or they're able to achieve whatever it is that they're trying to do, because they really have a different level of sophistication focusing on those industries. Okay, so maybe shifting gears a bit, in terms of what's to come, right? So we analyzed over 250 technologies, and basically, in the next 3 to 5 years, these 8 technologies that you see on screen are probably going to play the biggest role in organizations, as we see change coming through. And the technologies are not going to be used alone. They're probably going to be in combination. So you're going to see AI with drones or something like that, right? I think what's important for this grouping is that we understand what types of risks this brings to our respective organizations, and how are we going to be dealing with it, right? And just to give you, I'm not going to go into all of the details, but AI, artificial intelligence, we fairly familiar with. Augmented reality is effectively where you're augmenting a virtual world into the real world, and already we saw a hack with this. It's pretty much proof of concept, but something that can be done. So what the researchers did was they wrote code that would hide any vehicles. So assuming somebody's wearing a pair of glasses, so you get like these Google glasses or whatever it is that's augmenting reality. So you're crossing a road, and if we hide the cars, you're not going to see an oncoming car, right? So you effectively could kill someone through something like that. So with all of these technologies, it is going to present a risk. If you look at the 3D printing and the advancements we've seen in that space, that's going to revolutionize the manufacturing industry, right? Because your barriers for manufacturing start shifting, right? So the intellectual property held by those organizations is going to become key, because anybody's going to be able to, once you have the schematics or the plans, be able to to 3D print whatever it is, devices or whatever it is. So on this next slide, I've just got a short video again, just to show you what some of these advancements that we're seeing are, and to understand some of the impacts of or the risks that we're going to be seeing now.
Look at these images. Now, tell me which Obama here is real.
To help families refinance their homes, to invest in things like high-tech manufacturing, clean energy, and the infrastructure that creates good new jobs.
So I'm just going to pause there at this point, but the key here is that all of those 4 Obama videos none of them are real. All of them are fake. So effectively, this is called deep fakes. You've probably heard or read about it by now, but you're able to create, using technology, fake videos that look very lifelike. So from a digital forensics perspective, there's a lot of investment going on right now just to be able to detect it. How do we go about detecting these pictures, these videos, as they become sometimes spreading viral online. Also just looking at some of the other issues that we're seeing cropping up at the moment. If we look at in the US, one of the sheriff departments bought some software that used an algorithm to predict who might commit a crime. But what deputies started doing then was effectively harassing people who hadn't committed a crime as yet. Right? So they were taking this data and maybe misusing it in that sense. The picture on the right-hand side of the watch, that's a watch for elderly people and people with dementia. It tells them when to take their tablets, but it also has a cloud-based function where, for whatever reason, it needs to connect to the cloud, so it's cloud-enabled. Researchers found a way to be able to change the messages to be able to make someone take their tablets more often, right? So you could effectively kill somebody through something like this, right? But that's because there was a vulnerability on the software. The picture in the middle at the bottom, fairly interesting one. Again, proof of concept attack. You had a Alexa device placed in a room. 75 meters away, you had another building. Researchers pointed a laser at the Alexa device. Using the laser, they were able to transfer software onto the Alexa device, which modified its functioning. And once they've got their malware on, then they were able to listen to all the conversations in the room, as well as take control of the person's credentials, whoever was logged onto the Alexa device, in order to, do transactions or whatever it is online. And so I mean, again, what I'm trying to get across is, as we adopt technology, it does come with risk. We need to be cognizant of the risk because we can't get away from the fact that we are moving in that direction. The next slide is just two quick case studies that I thought to talk through. The first one is an investigation that we worked on. A large healthcare provider was attacked and effectively shut down. This is over a 20,000 person network. The attacker entered the network, via end user's machine. Again, somebody was watching videos at work. They went to one of those sites that Dodge from their malware entered. And once the attacker got on, now this is obviously retrospectively, once we completed the investigation, what we found is the attacker then moved laterally across the network. One of the first things they did, which was interesting, was they went through all the financial reports to understand what's the ability of the company to pay a ransom. Right? And this was a fairly large company, so they deemed it to be a worthwhile target. After that, they spent 3 weeks. They layered their tools across the network, and what was interesting is they used the same tools that the IT administrators used to manage the network, but just added in malware to a lot of those, like IP scanning tools, etc., and started placing them across the network. Then they had their malware being distributed across the network. What was clever is they used the Active Directory servers and file and print servers. So any servers that had full visibility of the network because of how they function is what they used to distribute and set up their malware across the network. Then on one night, a Sunday night at about 1 o'clock in the morning, they detonated the ransomware, which effectively took out the entire server farm of the organization, as well as compromised a number of users' endpoints, right? So in total, they spent 3 to 4 weeks prepping the environment and then activated the ransomware on a particular night. So we're talking impact. Like I've mentioned, all the servers were offline. What this means now in a modern organization is that you have zero access to communications. You don't have email, voice over IP is down. The other thing that starts presenting a problem is that you don't have access sometimes to HR records. because you might have had multiple electronic copies, but if everything shut down and you can't switch on the machines, people's phone numbers, etc., started to become a problem. And a complication we had during the actual process of responding to the incident and trying to bring up the environment was obviously during COVID, you had a limitation of how many people you could have on site, right? So do you bring the entire team on site to try to do your recovery and risk everybody potentially being infected if there's a breakout, or do you stagger it and delay your timelines for recovery? Because in a situation like this, effectively the organization has to pull the plug, you offline. There's no connectivity, no VPN. Everyone has to be on site to be able to recover. The backups, you might ask, why didn't switch to backups? Backups became inaccessible because Active Directory had to be taken offline. Active Directory was so badly compromised, and the cloud backup system used Active Directory credentials for someone to be able to go in and pull back the backups to systems, right? So in this case, the client had 3 data centers. All 3 data centers were compromised. So with these types of attacks, they're fairly devastating. And what we're seeing from a risk register perspective is that the risk of complete loss of IT systems is no longer something that has a low probability. We've seen numerous incidents like this. So that almost becomes like a medium probability that you need to start catering for from an organizational risk perspective. So that's the first case study. The other one is not the one that we investigated. The second one is really the Target breach, which occurred, I'm actually forgetting, but I think it was around 2013. So it's fairly old, but it's interesting still, as information comes to light as to how the attack happened. They had put out Excel documents with guidance notes for their suppliers online, basically telling their suppliers what processes to follow. If you went into the metadata of these Excel documents, you can see on the top where it says last edited, you've got a username up there, last printed. It starts giving you an idea of how they name the shares on the network. So if you look at data exfiltrated, the attackers then mimicked how they name their shares on the network, created a share. So when they stole information, they pooled all the information together in that particular folder. And then on one night, they just exfiltrated all of that data out of that folder, right? And just the prefixes to their share names, like TTC, as an example, meant Target Technology Center in Brooklyn Park, right? So the attackers sort of, they're watching us as well, and we sometimes inadvertently putting out a lot more information than we should. So this is my second last slide, but if we look at what are the entry points, how are they attacking organizations? The traditional entry points were always your employees coming via third parties, and then you had your infrastructure, right? That's your IT, your normal IT systems, your operational technologies that we're deploying, and IoT, that's your Internet of Things. I think from an evolving threats perspective, we're starting to see organizations trusted by others, again, in a way, third parties that are being compromised. And if we looked at this, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was ASUS last year, the computer manufacturer, the attackers wanted to get to particular organizations. So what they did was they compromised ASUS, the actual chips. They modified the software going onto the chips, and then the computers end up being purchased by whichever company that they're wanting to attack, and they're infiltrating, through those means. So similarly, we saw with the SolarWinds attack as well that I described earlier. Supply chain processes, again, you sometimes see very cheap products being offered for very niche industries. We saw a bit in the in the airline industry, and what you start finding is that there's a number of parts on a plane, and it's just important to note that they feed data back to various parties, sometimes to the manufacturer. In some of these instances, you've seen these parts feeding information to a third party that's unknown. So those are, where they might have been, where the supply chain was compromised and and somebody was able to get a product in that's doing something else. And I think as we move into more smarter devices that start handling operations and have more of an operational impact on the business, we need to be careful of this, right? So if I look at the mining sector as an industry, they're deploying these smart devices now that are handling safety, health equipment, so like monitoring oxygen in the mines, etc. If somebody is able to tamper with those devices, the impact can be far-reaching. We've also seen attackers, it's almost on their way out sometimes after attacking, they're dropping crypto mining tools into an environment, so it starts depleting your processing power and they're using your machines to do crypto mining. I've already spoke of the industrial Internet of Things, that's the IIoT. And then, the last one is cloud adoption. So we've seen many organizations moving to the cloud, which is fine, but they're not retraining the IT staff. So, how on-prem Active Directory system works versus a cloud Active Directory system, there's differences, right? And we found due to this lack of training, it's contributed to attacks because sometimes they just inadvertently misconfigured devices or were not able to understand the types of alerts that they were seeing that allowed an attack to persist. Okay, and then just moving to my last slide. In conclusion, effectively, some of the things that we can look out for and consider doing better. Cybersecurity strategies, policies, all of those things are great, but often we're finding those are being done for compliance purposes, meaning that people develop them just to get the auditors off their back, and it's not really yielding business value. So have policies, strategies that you can actually execute on. And your cyber strategy now, with the types of attacks that we're seeing, need to include recovery processes. I mean, how do you rebuild a 400 or 300 server farm when every single machine is compromised, right? So and to give you an idea on some of the attacks that we've seen, your registries on Windows servers are typically around the 250 megabyte mark, where we've seen attackers plant backdoors and modify that. We've seen these registries go up to about 8 gigabytes in size. So what that means is that for you to if you want to get SAP or one of your other systems back up running, you need to reinstall from scratch, from the operating system, your application layers, etc., moving upwards because everything is so badly compromised, or effectively scrap your VMs and start from scratch, right? The other one that's important to note is your incident response plans. Again, we're finding over 70% of the incident response plans at clients. So when we're responding to an incident, we're not able to use them during an incident. So they just look good on paper or have glaring gaps in them that they're not usable. Monitoring is another area that's really done mainly to satisfy the auditors, where you have all the reports, all the checklists mailed to everyone. We're finding a lot of organizations are just not using that data effectively or monitoring the wrong things, right? And you only find this out when you're faced with an attack and doing the investigation, then you realize that we have all these gaps in the monitoring process. The other interesting thing we've seen during attacks is that organizations are starting to deploy smart or AI-enabled monitoring systems. Those are really cool, but what you need to note as well is that they flag things, right? So these AI systems flag to say, okay, we think something's happening or whatever it is. If a human operator doesn't react to that over time, the AI system learns it as normal and good behavior. So in the attack that I spoke about earlier, the client was running an AI system. It was flagging something that it saw that seemed funny. Nobody reacted to it. So after a period, the system took that behavior to be normal because nobody was reacting to it and carried on and stopped flagging it. In the meantime, the attacker was very much in the environment. If you look at cyber awareness training, again, with all the technical controls we have in place, the human element then becomes our weak point as organization. And what we're finding is that your training needs to be top down. You need to start with very focused training from the board level, your ex-cos, man-cos, your risk teams, and then moving down to your general user population, right? Your high risk employees are your executives and your top layer, right? They're the ones who are going to be targeted. Procurement, finance also should receive some targeted training. And then the grouping that's often missed are your executive personal assistants, your PAs, because they have access to really, really sensitive information, and attackers normally target them. Then if we look at the, your IT tech vendors and third parties, we need to implement processes around third-party due diligence that, and what this means is that we may decide to not do business with a third party or vendor who might be coming at a good price, has a good product, but their security posture is something that we're not comfortable with, right? They're not ascribing to good standards, etc., because they present a risk to you ultimately. And then if you're looking at the last one, which is speaking of managing cyber risk, especially with new tech deployment, we're finding organizations, deploying new tech, sometimes getting their internal assurance providers to take a look at it, but those assurance providers don't have the skill or the experience in dealing with it. So as a result, they give it the go ahead, it goes live, and immediately you start seeing issues there, right? And there's been multiple occurrences like that. The other thing that that I see fairly often at audit committees is over the years, maybe over the last 10 years, an organization has accepted certain risks from an IT perspective, and it could be something legacy like unencrypted protocols, FTP, or something like that. But those things need to be revisited in the modern or in the current time that we're in. Those risks are not feasible for us to still be living with, right? They just present too much of risk given the current landscape. So that's really the sum of my presentation. I do have a short video. Nolan, I don't know if I do have time to play it. It's probably about 2 minutes that I thought might be useful for everyone to see, just in terms of how governments are leveraging the technology as well.
Yeah, I think you can go for it. It's 4:50 now, so
Sure.
I think you can do that. Yeah.
Cool. It is slightly dated. I think we probably got it updated by now. Okay, so having watched that, I think WhatsApp, Telegram, and Signal are probably the least of our worries right now. But yeah, that's really the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any, so in this time for questions.
Okay, we've got a question on the chat group here. I'll read it out to you, Junaid.
Okay.
Okay. In responding to this incident, do you find that most companies accepting offers from hackers as a result of ransomware attacks?
Sorry, Nolan, you're breaking up a bit.
So basically the question is, would ransomware attacks, do you find that companies are falling victim to this and accepting to pay the ransom fee?
Yeah, it's a mix, right? So think of an organization where, and some people have the DR system or systems with no latency, meaning that your DR is almost real time. In those instances, we found certain organizations have opted to pay because they've lost their live data plus backup systems through these attacks. Maybe they don't have tape, etc. So it varies. Also, the organization's policy. Some have a policy of not obviously paying these sort of things. But what we're starting to see is legislation. It's starting off in the US where it actually can become a criminal offense to pay these ransom demands, right? So. And I think that's probably what we're going to start seeing as a global trend, where countries will effectively to kill the organized crime syndicates, not allow organizations to pay unless it's dire circumstances.
Okay, so there's two more questions here. Someone wants to know if it's okay if they mail you on your work email. I think you've got it on your slides.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Another question. How do we move our clients away from performance actions for purely audit purposes instead of actually performing adequate testing or monitoring for their benefit?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, but yeah, so it needs a few things to happen. It needs one is for auditors to be upskilled to be able to to understand the landscape and not move with generic plans or rolling forward plans year on year within organizations. So it's it's understanding all the technology, the impacts, the business impacts of it, and then it's starting to show business value, right? And that normally comes through with how we recommend things, the types of solutions we can co-create with business in being able to mitigate the risk, right? So where we take a very hard stance as auditors to say, no, it has to be this way and no other way, that's not going to work. And as you start showing business value, you'll find business starting to actually, and we've seen it at a few organizations where the business then starts calling on the internal assurance providers, be it the risk teams or the internal audit teams, to actually actively participate in discussions, and that whereas where you see the teams are don't have a good relationship, they'll do everything they can to keep them out of those meetings. So it does vary by organization, but those are some of the things that I've seen working.
Okay, Junaid, some of the members would like you to post your details or contact on the chat.
Sure.
If you'd be willing to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Excellent.
Well, thanks, Junaid. Thanks a lot. I'm assuming there's no other questions, guys. Okay, no other questions. Thanks, Junaid. Really enjoyed that. Just so everyone knows, Andri is recording this session, so she'll make it available for us at some point in the future. So on to our next speaker, we've got Callie Baney.
Hello, everybody. How are you? I'm sure everybody enjoyed Junaid's share. I think it was brilliant. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it very much. Sorry, I just want to switch my screen. Sorry, being blonde. Sorry, give me a minute. I promised Henry I know how to do this. There we go. So I'd like to thank ISACA for having me this afternoon. Thank you very much for Junaid setting a very high bar. I'm from Ignition Group, head of the PMO. So I'm not in the auditing technical details. So we'll leave those questions to Junaid. I would like to talk today about DevOps and the impact that it has on people, processes, and what I refer to as playthings. So the world of engineering, as we know, is constantly changing. Things are rapid, often disruptive. We currently have digital transformation and digital disruption accelerating. I don't know if you remember when agile methodologies were introduced into development teams, there was a lot of change. People battled to find their place, and it took a while for everyone to get their head around the different way of working within sprint teams. DevOps is doing the same thing. It's changing the way the development teams interact with operations. And sometimes these processes, they have tangible impacts that we can see, but often there's an intangible impact on people. And today I'd like to discuss how DevOps and any other process changes impact our most valuable assets, which is our teams. And as these processes evolve, the types of impacts may change. I think that rapid changes also create a change in how we interact with the world that we find ourselves in. So just briefly, what is DevOps? It's really a combination of cultural philosophies, practices, and tools that allows an organization to deliver their applications faster. So it increases velocity and it shortens the system's development lifecycle and allows for continuous delivery of high quality software. And the reason it does this is because you can do small releases quickly. If something breaks, you only need to go look at that small piece that you've delivered, assuming that the system was already stable. So it revolutionizes the way businesses operate, how our teams work together, and also the types of skills that we need. DevOps is only one model. We have the traditional IT ops model where we had the process of designing, developing, maintaining infrastructure and software. We also have AI ops, which really uses data science operating model, where it learns behavior of the system, which Junaid spoke about earlier. And it allows you to scale systems according to your needs. And it really expands the horizon of DevOps by introducing machine learning. There's also a theoretical model, which I think will start creating a lot of discussion called no-ops, which is where systems will really be self-managed. So why do we need to change? The primary motivators for this change to move to DevOps is velocity. So we want to maintain a competitive edge in the market. All businesses want to reduce costs. We also want to fail fast. So if we are going to make mistakes or things are going to go south, we want that to happen quickly so that we can fix it quickly. The longer it takes to find a defect or an issue, the more expensive it is to fix. We can target our root cause analysis based on the change that we've made, the small change that or the package that we've released. We want continuous integration. And we also want improved quality. So there's continuous testing, there's real-time analytics that helps us to quickly decide what we need to do to improve our quality. So I'm going to ask Amra to start a poll. And I'd like to ask you, with the changing way of working, how many of you have wondered if this will impact your career? So do you think these changes impact your career? Some organizations, really big organizations, have embraced DevOps. Some of them as far back as 2015, 2016. Some of the interesting ones, or that I found exciting, is NASA with their Jet Propulsion Laboratory. They've done real-time analytics of all the data that they're collecting from the Mars rover. And that means that they have millions of data points that they're receiving daily that helps them to make very quick decisions. They've done this using containerized data systems and tools that they continuously deploy so that their system engineers and data scientists can respond quickly, develop, analyze, and share their visualizations and algorithms. Disney also did a very interesting thing. DevOps was instrumental in them becoming the biggest streaming video launcher in recent history. And almost overnight, they became competitors to Netflix, Amazon, etc. And they added 10 million subscribers in one day during COVID, launching on the 12th of November. To me, that's an incredible success story that shows the increase in velocity and doing something this amazing. BMW started in 2019. They use something called Biz DevOps, which is where you're looking at the project funding's business value to what the project will provide. Traditionally, we should be doing this for projects, but it's often something that is only done after the system goes live. They are using microservices and cloud-based architecture. They've got 30,000 servers running, 5,000 different applications. They decided that the best way to get this done was to start small. So they did baby steps towards the change, as opposed to attempting to make sure that their wholesale was totally transformed all at once. This is a sensible approach, I believe, because it means that you can auto-correct the small things that you're implementing and don't have this huge implementation plan, and then when it goes wrong, then you've got a whole lot of stuff to fix. Starbucks, I did not know that it takes 300,000 people to make coffee. Starbucks started their DevOps journey in 2015. They learned how to balance the desire of quickly pushing code forward and making sure that the code was tested and ready for deployment. They've managed to reduce their cycle time by 74%. That cycle time reduction is definitely something businesses would want, because that means that it's cost effective. It's putting more money in their pockets, which we know that's what business is about, is the bottom line. So those are some really incredible stories of how this has impacted big organizations and that they've used it to their benefit. And do you want to stop the poll? So if we look at the results, 78% of us here believe that changing technologies does have an impact on our careers. That's quite a high percentage, so approximately 80%. So who is impacted? Everybody is impacted. If you believe that you're not impacted, then you're ignoring what's happening around us. Every single role will be impacted, need to be adjusted. People will need to reinvent themselves, both personally and professionally, so that they can keep up with the change and make sure that they're ahead of the curve. And some of the questions that I've heard asked often is, what will I do when, for instance, what will I do if we're now automating testing? Will I still be needed in this job? How can I contribute to this job? So people are impacted, and to me, that's the most important thing that organizations need to take care of, is that their people are upskilled, that their people security is their personal security is taken into account. Because although the systems are changing and the processes are changing, the people that you have in your organization have a lot of information in their heads that you can tap into to make the changes your organization needs to ensure that you're getting more profitable, your turnaround times are faster, and you're getting the best in the industry, because domain knowledge must never be underestimated. Some of the barriers to change, particularly with concepts like or operational processes like DevOps, is that they are very easy. It's very easy to see on a piece of paper, on an organogram, that there are barriers between different departments. So you may have the development and testing departments reporting to the software development manager, the auditing department reporting to governance, the support team reporting to the CTO, and each of these divisions or departments have their own culture. They have their own goals, their own way of working, and their own culture. Their personalities are often different, and I'm not sure if you have had these jokes before, where the project managers are the extroverts and the auditors carry red pens, and the testers are the goalkeepers, the support guys or the guys that work late feel the impact of the dev and testing guys not doing it properly. So there's stereotypes around different roles, and these stereotypes are often related to the types of personalities in these particular job roles and what they do, and also what they view as important in their day-to-day life. What we want to do with DevOps is remove the barriers. So we want to manage the world that we live in, what I refer to as cradle to grave. So from the time something starts until the time it's no longer needed, it needs to be across the board, make sure that the barriers are removed. This means that there needs to be joint responsibility regardless of your skill set. So everybody has the same goal, everybody's culture needs to be merged. Everybody understands that team success requires each individual to do what they do well. It also requires a shared culture, where the culture is based on constant improvement, never-ending change, using KZN as a model to get better and better, get delivery better and better. So change is inevitable. Amra, can you please run another poll? I'd like to ask how many of you have been inclined to avoid change? So when things change, we need to plan them in a positive way, right? We need to make sure that whatever we're doing has a positive impact on our organization and the individuals that work for us. If there is a negative impact, then stress levels in our teams will go up. People will become anxious and there will be resistance to the change, which is why I believe many organizations actually have change management departments which manage change in a positive way so that people do not feel insecure. When insecurity happens, people feel like their financial insecurity has been compromised, their health has been compromised because they're in a high stress situation. They may feel that their job security is compromised. They will go into fight, freeze or run mode, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So as change managers, we need to coach our teams. We need to upskill our teams. We need to make sure that they have bought into the changes, that they're not nervous to discuss with their boss how they feel they will be compromised with the changes that are coming in the organization. And also things they need to be able to discuss, things that are not really aligned to their job descriptions that they may be interested in investigating or looking at with regards to the changing landscape in which they are working. Now, change for me impacts the individual with regards to what place they are in. So where are they as individuals? What place are they in? Where do they find themselves in their career? If you're fairly early in your career, then change is potentially easier than if you've been in the same career for 30 years. Where are you on your learning path? And what place do you want to be at? journey, if we look at it as if we were looking at something safe, we have a comfort zone. You feel nervous, and then people feel resistance to move from the safety zone through the changes to hit the risky zone. People respond in three ways to stress. They either feel like they need to, they feel like they need to fight, so they will fight the change, argue their way through it, or they freeze and they do nothing. And we all know that if you do nothing in the technology space, you go nowhere, right? So we need to ensure through this journey, we are making sure that the teams that we work with feel safe. They understand that their positions are secure, or where they're going is secure, and that the contribution that they make is significant. Because past experience definitely adds value to the new ways of doing things. The process of change, you can stop the poll now, Henry. I see we have a very, very confident team attending. 61% do not avoid change. That's fantastic. I'm in the 21% potentially. Makes me nervous. So we need to move through this process of change. We need to go from now, where we have an identity and we have some kind of security in what we do, to the new, which is risky and exciting, and work through the uncertainty and the fear of the change. If we do not go through this cycle, and in technology you may go through it quite often, we will never progress. We will stay where we are. And when you stay where you are, you make yourself unuseful to the organization and to yourself, because we all need to move forward and have some kind of goals. So there's a very interesting model called the CAMS model that was designed by Damon Edwards and John Willis, which aims to create a KZN environment. Remember, that's the environment where we're merging and we're becoming one with one goal. So the teams have no walls. And I believe that this is very relevant to the DevOps world. And as I was listening to Junaid, it seems very relevant to the cybersecurity world, where we need to remove the walls so that all team members and all teams are looking for the same things. They're working towards the same goal that the organization is aiming for. So the culture, how we measure things, the automation that we do or don't put in place, the sharing of information, those are very important processes that we need to follow, attitudes that we need to have to encourage collaboration, communication, and a continuation of learning and changing. I'm particularly interested in the culture and the sharing and how the people are impacted. So I'll be speaking a little bit more about that. So culture is important. And perhaps, Amri, we can do a poll to ask the question, do you believe that team culture is as important as skills? So cultural complexity is multifaceted, and one slide doesn't do it justice because culture is extremely complex. And these are some examples of things that would influence a person's culture. The culture can be established by their family, where they grew up, the types of experiences that they've happened, what their belief systems are, what values they hold, what worldviews they have. And these cultures ground people in a place of significance and security. It's where they feel they belong. This same cultural complexity exists within the workplace, because we have a culture. So the dev team will have a culture, the auditing team will have a culture. So this cultural complexity not only impacts individuals and families or children or parents, it also influences the teams in which we work, because the team will have a culture. And I'm sure you've heard that said many times, like the culture of that team is, okay? So how do we work on getting this cultural complexity moving towards a team culture where we are merging multiple cultures, whether it's multiple teams, merging a new individual into an existing team, etc. It's very, very important that leaders take responsibility for this. They need to move their teams into a collaborative space where the team is happy to innovate and to grow. So they need shared values, shared principles, and humility. And some of the things that I believe need to become part of a culture where things are changing is that we encourage people to listen before they speak. And that means as leaders, we need to listen before we speak. We need to show respect for one another in order to gain respect. Respect is not something we can demand. We can't go into the position of as a leader and say, you will respect me because of my title. We need to gain respect by giving respect. And that to me is about a shared principle that needs to be within a team for it to merge successfully. We need to be learning focused, focusing on learning, growing ourselves, encouraging our teams to grow, creating opportunities for them to learn from one another. It doesn't have to be a formal degree. It can be through interactions, encouraging coffee dates where people are learning from one another. We need to focus on growth rather than failure. Often there's a great sense of fear when people fail, and that's because of, I believe, because of leadership whips you if something goes wrong. Remember, with the KZN model, we want to fail fast, adjust our course, and move forward. We also need to learn empathy. So we need to walk in our team's shoes, get our hands dirty. I've found this invaluable in my career, where I go and sit and learn and understand what somebody does outside my area of expertise, so that I can understand what's happening. I can get the empathy. I can understand why testing gets frustrated if they have to redo regression tests every day. Why do people get frustrated with repetitive activities? Why do people get frustrated when somebody else is not respecting their work or listening to the things that they have to say? So if I look at the poll results, 92% of us believe that team culture is as important as skills. So I would like to suggest then that leaders need to look at the culture of their teams and the skills. When you're interviewing, look at the culture of the person. Will that person fit the team culture, as well as the skills that they have? Often we get somebody in that's highly intelligent, has all the paperwork, but is not a team fit. And that disrupts the team, which means that there won't be respect. They won't be learning focused, and they will start to fear speaking out, because this person has been brought in as the shining new object, if I may say so, that is supposed to make things better. So that's talking about the people and the places and where they fit. I'd like to talk a little bit about the playthings. So having playthings in tech is really fun. At Ignition Group, we have a lot of access to different types of tools, which is really fun and adds value to our lives, because we're able to grow and learn, and we have test environments where even if you're not a developer or tester, you can actually learn how these things work. So new tools can be exciting. They add value to our lives. They also remove repetitive tasks, because let's be honest, repeating yourself or repeating the activities you do every day is boring. And there's many tools on the market that can be used successfully by different organizations. The challenge is, though, that having many playthings or tools can become overwhelming. And you may create almost like ADD behavior where you cannot focus on one thing long enough to get any benefit from it. So some of the questions I would encourage you to ask before selecting a tool is, does this tool make sense for my business? You need to ensure that it adds value to the business that you're in and that you're not adopting it because it's getting a lot of good reviews on YouTube or Google. Will the investment for this tool, both the license investments and the man hours to learning how to use it, allow us to scale in the future? So not looking at investing just today, but will the investment that I make today that makes sense for my business allow me to grow my business and allow me to scale? Then the most important question, I believe sometimes is forgotten, is will this tool increase customer loyalty? Because customers need to be forefront of the decisions that we make. If the tool increases your customer loyalty and builds trust in your brand, that needs to be considered when you're deciding what you want to invest in. And I'm sure many of you have seen these tools. There's many, many more. These seem to be from the research that I've done high on the list for most organizations. So if we look at how we move forward, we need to make sure that we are upskilling. Your career and the where you advance to is not the responsibility of your manager or the company that you work for. We as individuals need to make sure that we are upskilling ourselves and that we are taking control of our careers. We need to collaborate. So we need to find out what other people are doing, find out what other organizations are doing, share the knowledge that we have with others, because it's through collaboration that we can grow and we have the opportunity to grow others and learn. We need to strive for improvement and not perfection. Improvement is important. I think when you're striving for perfection, you will always fail because no one is perfect and we can't do things perfectly. But if we're striving for improvements and we follow the DevOps principle of constant improvement, fixing as we fail, improving again, our skill set will grow and very likely give you the opportunity to share those improvements that you're making with others to help them grow. You need to leverage your experience so that the information or the experience you have up until this point is not wasted. And to explain that, I'd like to use the example of, I'm sure you all remember we used to have data capturers. So somebody used to get information on a spreadsheet and they would sit and type this information into some kind of database, like an Access database with the UI. Then we find ways to automate this process. We do an automated import of information into a database, and that person, that data capturer, is no longer strictly required to do that particular job anymore, which may be boring. What has that person learned in their role as a data capturer? They very likely learned the different types of data you can put into database fields. So they would have learned this is a text field and I shouldn't type numbers in there. This is a number field that mustn't have letters in it. This field only allows me to type in 13 digits for the ID number. This field has text that I can type long stories in. So they've learned something about data. They've learned different types of data. They've learned the relationship between the data. So the first name and the last name is related to the email address, etc. So they have knowledge. They have data knowledge. When the way we work changes from somebody physically capturing that data to us importing that data, there is knowledge in that person's head through training and upskilling that can be used in, for instance, helping with data checking data as testing that when it's in the system, it's actually correct. Perhaps they can start studying how to use SQL databases or MySQL databases based on where they have gained their experience up until that time. So it's very important, I believe, for us to leverage the experience that we have. Nothing we have learned to this date is useless. I often say to my teams and my children, no knowledge is ever wasted. Use the experience and the knowledge that you have to grow. Leaders need to make space for their teams to grow. Encourage growth, encourage training. Do not spoon feed and do not micromanage. Suggest these are the things that I think you could learn. What do you think you can learn? And encourage them to go and do that. Please remember that your knowledge growth, your upskilling is your responsibility, your individual responsibility. Leaders need to make that space available so that people can grow and allow them the opportunities perhaps to take up the time off for the company to invest in that training so that people grow into the new technologies that we're going to be using. We talk about the places. Remember, we discussed where we are, what place are we currently in, and where do we see ourselves going. We need to plan for incremental change. So when you build a house, you start with your foundation and then put brick upon brick upon brick, and then eventually got a house. The same needs to happen with change in technology. We need to take our foundation and put the bricks in, learn, learn, learn. Some of us will do it faster than others, but incremental change is important. Looking at our careers as saying, currently I only have a foundation with 2 rows of bricks and I want to be a house. So I'm going to pre-plan everything to the nth degree to get the house, means that you're going to ultimately end up being behind. So plan incrementally. Consider KZN, so consider the fact that you want to incrementally fix as you go along and adjust. So I plan to do these 3 things. Number 3 failed, so I'm going to adjust and now do number 5. Adjust and improve the way that you work, the training that you do, and move forward from the place where you're at to the place where you want to be. Use what works. Sometimes we get put in a box and we are told that this is how things will be done, and there is no negotiation. And when any suggestions are made that fit outside that box, they are smacked down and not used. I would like to encourage you to use things that work. Just because another organization or another team is using a particular process or using a particular tool, don't try and shoehorn it into your world. Use what works, because if it works, you can change and you can improve. So please be careful not to allow yourself to be molded into something that doesn't work for you, because that just creates anxiety and actually slows down the process of growth. Please also bear in mind that processes need to support people. Processes are not there to replace people. I looked at a study recently that indicated that with the advent of automation, AI, the increase in available jobs has gone up by 57% in the next 3 years. So process will not replace people. People's skills will need to be changed. We will need more skills, highly skilled people to be able to cope with the changing environment in IT. Make yourself ready for that and ensure that the processes you have in place, including the training processes, the availability of tools, etc., support people to grow and become more skilled. For Playthings, the tools that we spoke about, we need to invest some time in learning them. Don't wait for somebody to tell you, here's a course that you have to do. Go look, do the research, invest the time in learning, understand the pros and cons of all the tools that before you choosing, and keep it simple. Overcomplicating things makes it difficult to implement, makes it difficult to get acceptance. So it's really, really important that we keep it simple and that we ensure that the playthings that we're choosing benefit the business, benefit the customer, etc. It is very, very important that we as individuals understand that we have a responsibility to coach and mentor other people through changes. Everybody in my mind has the responsibility, to me it's almost like a social responsibility to assist people to grow. Moving forward in the world of change makes people feel insecure and makes them feel nervous. And we need to guide people through that. Our careers didn't come with a manual. My career certainly didn't come with a manual with a step-by-step process that do this on this day, make sure by this year you have that. It changes in IT constantly. So coaching helps. If you've got the experience in a particular area, use that experience to help others. It helps you to create direction for yourself in line with your values, interests, and skills, and it helps you to be able to help others direct where they're going to go. As an individual, it's really important to be proactive and to create your own manual. Just because today you're a project manager doesn't mean tomorrow you can't be the CTO. Create your own manual, decide how you're going to get there, seek out people that can coach you through these changes, and while you're doing that, coach others through the changes that they are going through. To me, collaborative and community learning is important, and like I said earlier, information is never wasted. So it's really, really important to be able to help one another. In conclusion, I've left quite a little bit of time for questions. I'd like to encourage you to be brave. Face your fears head on. Don't hide away. Don't sit in the corner with your blinkers on. Be brave. Don't wait for other people to drive your success. Be proactive. Set up your coaching sessions. Have your coffee dates. Meet with people so that you can grow, you can learn. They might expose you to things that you haven't thought about that may completely change the trajectory of where you think you're going. And remember to fail forward. So when you fail, move forward. If you're walking up a flight of stairs and you get to the 10th floor and you trip and you go down the stairs, you fall down the stairs until the 9th floor, you're not going to say, oh my word, I fell down the stairs, I'm now on the 9th floor, I'm going to go back to the 1st floor and start all over again. You're going to get up from where you are at and you're going to go up again. And that's what we need to do with our careers, and that's what we need to do with technology. We fail, we get up, we move on. So don't be afraid to experiment, to learn, and to be clear of the way forward that you see for yourself. Do not let other people determine your destiny. So I'd like to know if there are any questions or comments that can be made, particularly around the culture, changing of culture, the impact of automation, and how we feel that we can contribute to this being successful in the companies that we work for, in our personal lives, with our friends, etc. I'm not seeing the chat.
Okay, we've got one question from Fortune.
Oh, hi, everyone. I hope everyone can hear. I just asked if I can unmute because it's quite a long. It's quite a long thing for me to type in there. So I'm not sure if it's a question or more of the clarity from my understanding for the DevOps, like practically. What? Okay, let me put it like this. With like, I'm just looking at the practicality of the DevOps and Agile, because the principles, as you have detailed them here in the presentation, and thanks for the very insightful presentation. To me, they're very similar, and I'm kind of thinking when we as a from the project management perspective side, when we kind of evoluted from using the waterfall into Agile, the practical impact on our expectation from the stakeholders, like it was pretty much clear that obviously Agile was more effective as a delivery model for the software development project, if I could put it like that. But then with Agile and DevOps, I'm kind of struggling, like practically what's the difference? I mean, what has changed from the Agile methodology, from applying the Agile methodology to moving to DevOps, I mean, what are the changes and what is it that we, if I were to implement the DevOps moving from being agile, what is it that I need to kind of look out for that is not within the agile methodology? And the second question would be, with the agile
Can we do that
methodology
one first?
Okay.
Sorry, Fortune. Firstly, hi, haven't spoken to you for a long time. So Agile, remember, is related to the SDLC. So it's the dev and testing component of software development with the Scrum Master and the product owner. And in my experience from a project management point of view, the project manager sits overarching over multiple Scrum teams, third parties, IT operations, etc. For DevOps, the inclusion now, it's more of a shift into development, pushing code into operations, as opposed to us stopping at testing, handing over to a deployment team, doing the deployment, and then support by the support team. It's merging, or it's shifting left. It's shifting the deployments and the handovers, etc., into the software development team. So there will be smaller releases within an agile environment. So it's not replacing agile. It's just shifting this responsibilities into the sprint team. So when I joined Ignition, this concept was a little bit fuzzy for me as well. And so we do not have, and in DevOps, there is no deployment team per se. What happens is the developers, they write code or components that are easily pushed into production, and everything just happens automatically using things like deployment pipelines. And there is a handover, physical handover to the support team from this is what you're getting and this is how you manage the software point of view. But it's literally shifting left from operations into development to speed up the delivery into production using things like deployment pipelines. So there's no person anymore that sits and does a deployment. The software does it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Actually, I'm very happy because I was just going to ask something similar for my second question then, to say, if like I understand, I mean, the PM kind of sits like as like the overall process within the agile environment, but my other question is it like a possibility that I can still implement the agile methodology on my project, and then in sprints that I can implement the DevOps per sprint?
Yes.
Because get it is for the waterfall and agile is very clear where the PM is assigned and where the PM needs to move off from the project. And we do implementation after the project is done, and then hand over to the ops guys, and then they follow their own processes. Then at that point, the PM moves away to get assigned to something else. But with the DevOps, incorporate that post-implementation support, you know, the operations process. So where is the PM actually gets off from the project then? Maybe because some of the project would have stabilization for like, I don't know, like 60 days, where the PM is not really needed. Like at what point can the PM, you know, move away from the project then when we at the DevOps methodology?
I don't think, as we stand right now, while organizations are moving into this way of working, that the PM's role will change drastically. So the deployments will happen from the sprint teams, and the more mature the sprint teams are, at the end of a sprint, they'll be able to release their code. So within the sprint, they'll be using merging happening automatically. So they'll do constant builds. And when it's signed off by testing, it will automatically go into the production environment. The PM will still have to make sure that the support team knows what's coming. And they will also need to make sure that there's some kind of stabilization. But I do believe that the definition of a project will change. So currently you could have a project in inverted commas that's literally 2 sprints. I believe that those will become more automated task-like activities, and the project manager will deal with very big, complex pieces of work that cross multiple teams and multiple vendors, etc., as opposed to small incremental changes. So I think we'll get more complex work and less small work, if that makes sense.
Okay, so does that mean then the Scrum Master role, is it something that it's going to be look at fading away maybe in the future? Companies
No,
are going DevOps.
No, I think that the Scrum Master's portfolio will expand into making sure that the automated deployments are happening, that the pipelines are prepared within the sprint. So I think both roles will still be there for at least a time until they automate what we do. But I still think that the Scrum Master will be there, just their portfolio will increase because they will move beyond the testing activities into the more operational activities with regards to deployments. That's my view.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Fortune, for that question. Callie, we've got one more question that's here.
Yes.
So on the chat, audit always consider segregation of duties when it comes to developer access to production. DevOps changed this. Other than monitoring of logs, etc., how else can this be assessed?
So I've given quite a lot of thought to how auditing are impacted by this, because they do look in silos. So many times the audits I've been involved in, the PMs get audited separately to the developers and the testers, etc. With DevOps, most of the technology that we're using is in the cloud. So for instance, if we look at Azure, the auditing and monitoring and protection of information sits in the Azure framework, and there's tool sets that sit there that make sure everything's working correctly. So I believe that auditors may need to change how they audit, and their skills will need to be adjusted to understand that dev, testing, and ops are all happening within the same pipeline, and how they audit those particular activities will need to be adjusted. There will still be logging tools. So there'll still be logs that are put into databases. There will be Nagios and Greylog and all those fancy tools where the auditor can go and look at the end results of things and see what failed and what didn't fail and where breaches were. But if we also think about what Junaid was saying about the security changes and how things are moving in a security world, the auditing, definitely to me, the scope is going to become more technical, and there will be a need for auditors to understand the technology. I don't believe that they're going to be able to have checkboxes anymore. Does that answer the question?
Okay, no response there in the chat group. But thanks for that answer, Callie. I think it did answer the question. Guys, any more questions? We'll take one more.
Cool. So I'll go to my last slide. Based on the fact that I care about how people are impacted by the changes within technology, I have founded a coaching business where we do one-on-one coaching to help you navigate through the changes from where you are to where you want to be. And for this audience, in February, I have made 30-minute introductory sessions available that you're welcome to email me if you would like to book a session. These sessions will be after working hours and weekends, and not during my working hours at Ignition. So I'd like to thank you for your time. Thank you for having me present. I hope that it was helpful. And if you'd like to get in contact, then please feel free to do so. Thanks, Nolan. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Callie. I'm going to share my slide. Okay, thank you, Callie. Thanks, Junaid. Thanks a lot. Really enjoyed that. Thought it was a good start to the year, especially for ISACA. Over the years, we've been very focused on our kind of topics and presentations. I thought these were really apt for kicking off this year with cybersecurity and DevOps and coaching. Those are such hot topics right now. Both, obviously touching on the IQ side of things and EQ. So our next events, a big one for the year. We've got them in June and August. So that's the 7th to 8th June and August 24th, 25th. So please ignore the early bird here that ended in December. But these are virtual conferences, and later in the year in August, it's in person. Obviously, guys, we're taking COVID into consideration. We're very cognizant of that. So, if things change, there are talks about another wave coming, third wave. We'll assess things as the numbers in COVID progress. Hopefully, it comes down, and we can go back to a new normal. Notice I said new normal. Probably things will never be the same again. We've got a poll going, guys, so you can see some of you are answering that. Now, with respect to those conferences, those events, we need speakers, guys. So we're calling for speakers. If anyone's interested, please let us know. Reach out to us. You can see the contact number there at the bottom, or you can email info@isaca.org.za. The contact number is 087 094 0661. News and updates. So earlier I spoke about Poppy, WhatsApp, and blockchain. So I'm not going to mention those again, but the one that you guys should take the opportunity for is the grandfathering program for CDIPSI. That's ISACA's newest certification. Certified Data Privacy Solutions Engineer. Quite a lengthy one to say. So if you meet the criteria for that, guys, go ahead, apply for it. Some applicants have experienced different response times and how long ISACA head office in America takes to respond on the applications. So, it does vary. I've heard of some users, some applicants getting turnaround times of responses within 7 days, some 5 days, and some even a month. Right? So I think it could be that they're a backlog right now, my assumption, because the grandfathering program ends 1st of March, if I'm not mistaken, or around that date. So we've pretty much got 1 month left if you're interested in that. And then the actual exams, the first official exam on it will be in April. Bookings for that should open around March. So that's the one where you have to pay for the exam, get the review manual, and the questions and answers. So if you do meet the criteria at present for the grandfathering program, go ahead for it. The fee still does apply, although it's not an exam application fee. It's the grandfathering application fee, which, if I'm not mistaken, is somewhere, I think it's about $600 or $695. Once again, guys, membership renewals. ISACA South Africa is, we're able to do some of these events and get things going for our South African chapter and reach out to you guys and employ people within the ISACA chapter because of your membership fees that come into us. That's how we're able to do the good works and win awards. Obviously, your membership renewals benefit you, and your access to ISACA and the information that you get from there, and your careers as well. The list goes on. Please, guys, go ahead and renew your memberships and take advantage of the opportunity to bring in others. You get recognized for that, so take that opportunity. Designations, we've spoken about that earlier. We've got 2 designations. Please reach out to us and apply for those. Shop goodies, take a look at it. The quality is pretty good, guys. And that's it from me. Thanks everyone for attending. Really appreciate that. And just sharing the results from the poll, those if you're interested. Let's see, so 81% have renewed the memberships. I think you can all see it on my screen right now. 13% have registered for the annual conference. 53% prefer the virtual conference. Okay. I do like the virtual conference. For me, the challenge is if I'm virtual conferencing, I'm doing it from home with my kids. It's surprising actually that you guys haven't heard the screaming from my kids, them throwing things at each other. That's the usual. And are you planning on registering for the ISACA South Africa annual conferences? 62% of you said yes, you do intend on that. Well, that's great, guys. Let's see if we can get those numbers up. But thanks, everyone. Really appreciate you attending this and your questions. And Callie and Junaid, it was really great. Thanks for your topics. At some point, Andre will make this presentation available to you. Have a good evening, people.
Thank you very much. Have a lovely evening.